Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. This podcast is designed for the adult medical speech-language pathologist. Most of our audience members work in settings such as acute care hospitals, private practice, outpatient hospital clinics, and inpatient rehabilitation hospitals. Each episode has an accompanying audio course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. The content of this course is based on the research and experience of the presenters. The listener is responsible for researching to determine if the information and skills taught are appropriate for their clients, students, or patients. SpeechTherapyPD.com does not necessarily endorse, recommend, or favor the information shared, nor any of the claims, opinions, statements, offers, or services made by the presenter. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Renee Garrett, and I'm your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Before we get started, we have a few items to alert you to. Each episode is 60 minutes and will be offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. In this particular episode, we're going to just be discussing some traumatic events and some mental health concerns. So consider this a trigger warning that if you have concerns, you may not want to continue listening. And if you're okay with it, please join us for this important journey of discovery and education. Here are the financial and non-financial disclosures. So our guest tonight is Carly DeLaurier-Flanigan, and she will receive a small honorarium from SpeechTherapyPD.com for her participation in this podcast, and she has no non-financial disclosures. My financial disclosure is that as the host of this podcast and other webinars on SpeechTherapyPD.com, I do receive financial compensation. I am a paid employee of a private consulting firm in the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as adjunct faculty for both James Madison University and Old Dominion University. My non-financial disclosure is that I am the current secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Today we welcome Carly. Carly is a caregiver, support team, household manager, and director of activities for herself and her husband, who is a multi-TBI survivor. In her free time, she's a nursery manager at a conservation horticultural nursery. She also volunteers with her Belgian Malinois teammates in search and recovery as a human remains detection handler. That's not scary or intimidating at all, right?
It's not. Dead people don't talk.
Well, thank you so much. This means a lot to me. So kind of just to give people a little bit of a background, Carly and I met back in, 417. Yeah, it was 2011. Yeah, we met back in 2011 after her spouse, Patrick Flanigan, had a pretty traumatic TBI. And so, either one of us can probably describe the events, but it may be more relevant to have Carly kind of give her version, and then I can give the more of the medical pieces that are relevant to what we're talking about today.
Well, prior to 2011, he had multiple blast injuries in Iraq as an EOD technician. He was front and center on multiple of them and incurred what we could only speculate as brain traumas because they'd never bothered to do any tests. They just put them on a 14-day stand down and then sent them back out. But when he came back, he had obvious issues of PTSD, anxiety, and trauma. He was having night terrors. He'd get up in the middle of the night, run around the house with a weapon. The first time it happened, I tried to wake him up and he almost knocked me out. I had to learned to get up from bed and throw things at him from a safe distance to wake him up. So during this time, I developed anxiety. I can't imagine why. So he had taken some shore duty time. And in that shore duty time, he was on his way home from doing night drills, training other teams to go to Iraq. And a young woman who was intoxicated wrecked in front of him on the freeway. And him being the Boy Scout he is, he stopped to help her. He got her out of the car. He had parked behind her and put on his flashers, as a responsible person would do, and had got her out of the car. Her car was still in a 3-lane highway, and he'd pulled her out and got her to the side. And he said all he remembers is headlights, but a 18-wheeler hit her car that was in the lane, and that car hit her, the passenger, and Pat. And the car flung my husband into the lane, and he was ran over by an 18-wheeler and had significant injuries. He was diagnosed with, among all the other bodily harm, the brain injuries. He's probably the only adult I know that has shaken baby syndrome. So he had a shearing concussion and subdural hematoma, and he was in a coma for about 10 days.
In addition to that, broken pelvis, a shattered ankle, broken femur,
ribs, orbital socket.
Yeah, orbital fracture in his face, some pretty significant, pretty significant lacerations, some sort of, for motorcycle riders, road rash. So it was really a polytrauma kind of situation. And while the brain injury was pretty significant, the physical injuries were definitely impactful as well. And so one of the bigger things too that happened, just so that you kind of get an idea of why this was such an important case and how this all sort of came to link us together, was being the independent person, we'll call it that Patrick is. He wound up self-extubating. So he was intubated in the emergency room and on the ventilator. And so the final time that he self-extubated and they didn't have to re-intubate him, he actually suffered some damage to his vocal folds. And so he had, I think it was right true vocal fold paralysis, which was impactful for his vocal quality and his voice, but also his swallowing. So when we say what happened to Pat that led us to work together, that's an 8-minute conversation that we've really winged it down compared to.
Yeah. He was known in the hospital as Harry Potter, or the boy who lived.
It was one of those cases where I was still fairly early on in my career. I worked in inpatient rehab full time, and we had a really great multidisciplinary team. But what would happen is we would get cases and we'd get the admission paperwork and we would read through, and it wasn't always that people volunteered, but people that listen know I have a brain injury certification, and I was working on that at the time. And so I tended to kind of migrate towards that population because it just was a population I felt like I connected with and felt like I could really provide a lot of guidance and help for and education for. And so when I saw his case, I was like, oh, okay. And then I'm thinking, this is going to be a hot mess.
Oh, it was a hot mess.
It was.
The first memory I have of Renee is her trying to wrestle a biscuit out of my husband's mouth.
Yeah. So in all full disclosure, because he'd been in the hospital for a little bit, he'd been in our big trauma hospital here locally. And when he got transferred over to the rehab institute where I was working, I think at that time he was still in like pureed solids or something, because he was very impulsive. And I think that's just, that's his personality. Diet. Yeah, honey thick. That's right.
Honey thick. Yeah. Which he hated with a passion of 1,000 fires.
Yeah. Well, and at this point, he was still like a Ranchos level, I think 3-4, because he was still pretty. He had periods of wakefulness, but when he was out, he was out. He wasn't really on like awake for long periods of time. It was those shorter periods of time. And when he was, a lot of times he was very agitated. When he wasn't agitated, he was kind of like angry. He kind of ran that gamut of I'm pissed and now I'm just going to be mad at you. And then I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I'm going to go take a nap now. So
Well,
he was
I really got the brunt of it. You guys really got the nice version of it. Like he'd just be breathing fire, and Renee would walk in the room. He'd be like, "Renee, hi, how's it going?" I'm like,
It's the food motivator. You know, those primary motivators, those food safety shelter motivators, to work really well for patients. But yeah, at that point, he was on a pretty restrictive diet. He'd come over, and I don't even know, really, I don't remember how long he hadn't been eating long. I don't think, maybe 2 or 3 days prior to his discharge over to us. Uh, and so I had a lot of work to do because, you know, all in all, I'm trying to remember exactly. It was probably a 2-ish month stay in IPR, which is almost unheard of nowadays. I mean, you don't get that kind of stay. So that kind of speaks to the level of how much assistance he needed. You know, he wasn't walking at that point. He still wasn't really able to do self-grooming, those ADL tasks, like, you know, brushing his teeth and all that kind of stuff. He wasn't able to do that independently. Got lost in the task a lot. Just really easily distracted, trouble sequencing, organizing, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, while we think about the significance of the injury that he sustained that night, you know, I kind of want you to go back a little bit and talk about the impact that the prior injuries had, because you kind of talked about that a little bit. But one thing that we know happened when he was in the hospital was he was having some kind of really PTSD type dreams, and where he would think the dream was real and he was back in the field. And that was really scary for a lot of the staff because they weren't prepared for it.
Yeah, I know the staff was afraid of him because he has special ops background. But honestly, my father had also been through a traumatic accident and went through something similar. And he's like the most placid man you've ever met. And he came out of his drugs like a raging bull and was a complete different personality. Pat, on the other hand, he was pretty malleable. Like he never tried to hit anybody. He never, I mean, he'd argue with you, but that's just Pat. But everyone was touching, like, what it was like a stick, except for Renee, who would wrestle a biscuit out of his hand. But everyone was pretty afraid of him, I could see. And I felt like I really had to jump in and be like, oh, just tell him to shut up. Like, just keep pushing him, because like, this is how his mental brain works. He doesn't do easy. He wants it hard. That never changed. But, yeah, his previous brain traumas were very jarring for me because he never told me anything that happened in Iraq until he came out of his coma and started spewing everything to me while he was in Riverside. But I knew something was wrong with him when he had almost hit me. When I was trying to wake him up, I had told him, it's like, either you get some help or I'm going to the command, because I am not going to be hit. I'm not going to die. And this isn't a safe situation for me anymore. And it's scary. And he got really upset with me about that, but he did finally go and seek some counseling. At least he said he did. But the night traumas did subside for a while. But he had horrible memory issues even before the semi truck. He couldn't remember anything. His phone was like what ran his life. But could always, the fascinating thing is he remembers everything from EOD school. Couldn't remember where we lived in the hospital, but could tell you how to diffuse something. Like the guys would ask him all these questions, or like the complex math. It killed me. I'm like, I can't even do that. And you're sitting there asking him all these questions, and he's like, oh yeah, that's 18.2567999. I'm like, the brain is a mystery, but like he had very strange juxtapositions because he couldn't remember where I was a lot of the time. Even with Post-its, we'd have to leave Post-its if I ever had to leave, and he'd freak out. And he had it in his brain that I was with him during the accident. And so if I wasn't there and he couldn't see me, he would freak out about where I was. And that was part of the memory thing. And yeah, it was very tiring. I had some of his teammates come stay with him. I had to go to the dentist because I fractured my teeth because I was grinding them so bad because slightly stressful situation. And the whole time I'm being texted in the dentist chair, he wants you back. He doesn't know where you are. It's
Yeah, we really did have to develop a system for you to be able to have just even if it was to go home and let the dog out, because he really got, it was almost like a component of paranoia, like you weren't coming back, or that something had happened to you. And he was still in that belief that or still in the stage of the brain injury recovery where he wasn't trustful of a lot of people. And so we really had to, for me, doing the cognitive piece of therapy and the swallowing piece, I had to dig in and say, okay, what can we do so that you feel better about the situation? And we kind of developed that post-it system between the three of us to say, okay, Carly's left. She plans to come back by 6, but she's got to do this, this, and this. And then just keep reminding him over and over. And for those of you that have worked in brain trauma, you know that you kind of have to do that, because it's like they know, but they don't know, and they can't have the short-term memory is just not there. They can't recall. But a lot of times, a long-term memory task and those pieces of their personality and their level of intelligence that were there and strong prior to the injury, a lot of times those are still intact, because we were doing a lot of patient-centered functional task and care. And so I gave a lot of ownership to the task to both Pat and Carly to say, this is, I need to know what it is you want to see come of this. What do you want to be better at? And so for Pat at that point, it was like, I have this thing at home where I can pick locks, and I want her to bring that in so I can pick the locks. And I'm like, let's go, bro. Let's do that, because that's problem solving and complex. And he could do a lot of that still at that point, but he couldn't remember how to put on his pants the correct way, not be inside out or backwards, or put his shoes on, be able to brush his teeth to completion. Like a lot of times he could start a task, but he couldn't complete the task because he'd get lost. And so that was, kind of those big functional therapy things that we worked on. But again, because of the longevity of time that he was in the hospital, and then the things that happened kind of after, he went from our inpatient rehab to, I don't think, did he get home health?
No,
I don't remember him getting home
he
health.
wanted to go home. All he wanted to do was go home. And we were sent to the Richmond McGuire VA.
Right.
Or one of the outpatient programs there, which was helpful.
And he wasn't happy about that, but he
was not happy about that.
Yeah. And then he did some outpatient therapy at a few different facilities. And then, I think at this point, because this is more about you and your caregiver journey, let's kind of jump into that a little bit more, because we will have a part 2. After this airs, we'll have a part 2 that's strictly with Pat, so that we can kind of delve into what his compare and contrast the experience, because it's very different for you than it was for Pat. And then, having to sort of meld all that together, because not only did his life change, but your life really changed.
Yeah.
I mean, it really flipped.
And he has a hard time acknowledging that, because I'm not the one who had the actual physical trauma. He thinks my life is, at least he projects my life is just a field giving through daisies. I have it easy and everything. And, we are very blessed. We have a very nice life, but it is significantly harder. I heard someone say a quote about there's always events in your life where it's before and after. This is my event that's before and after. My life is nothing like it was before this happened. And I've had to learn to pivot and adjust and become a different version of myself based upon what I've been given.
Yeah. So let's talk. Can you talk about like the before, or is that difficult?
It's not really difficult because at this point it's so far removed. It's like it's happened to someone else.
Okay,
um,
that's fair.
it was, my husband was very vivacious and social and caring, and he always wanted to be a Navy SEAL, but he had bad eyes, so he somehow lied and got into EOD. And he loved his job dearly, and uh, I will not lie. I was a little lied to when I agreed to marry him. I was told that they would be working like 3-4 days a week, and then they just play volleyball on Friday. No, 9/11 happened, and we got married in 2006, and I basically didn't see my husband for 2.5 years. He was, if he wasn't deployed, he was training, but he loved his job very, very much, and I wanted to support him. And so I ventured out into the world and went into more horticulture, and I was a gardener at the botanical gardens when he was injured, which I ultimately lost that job because I needed to take care of my husband. So, but we'd go out, we'd have, go out with his team, we'd go to dinner, everything was easy, and it, there wasn't a checklist to get out the door, or there wasn't, the social anxiety. He now has a service dog who is my life partner. Not, and it took years, like at least 5 years, to convince him that there was something wrong with him. Not wrong, I don't want to use that as a dirty word, but he was at the level that he needed assistance, that he's not 100%, he's not who he used to be, and he needed some help. And he's still in that space of denial a lot of the time. He doesn't use the tools given to him. I use the tools. We have a whiteboard right over here with a list of everything to do each week, and who's the only one that uses it? We have a joint calendar. He never puts anything on it. And I understand the need to be independent, but there's a certain point where you have to step back. I'm horrible at math. Horrible. Makes my brain spin. I know when to step back and go, this is not my wheelhouse. If this is important, I shouldn't be doing it. He's not at that space to be able to do that. Say, maybe I shouldn't do this. I can't really do this anymore. His is more like, hold my beer, I'm going to go try.
That's so accurate. Oh my God, it makes me laugh because
you're not married to.
Yeah, but no, we can't, not acknowledge the level of progress that he did make. But
oh yeah,
for someone who is a long-term caregiver, and for someone who's a long-term survivor of multi-trauma plus prior TBIs, it's really important to acknowledge that while the progress that he made was definitely powers outside of our reach, but also speaks to the level of good health he was in prior, his intelligence level prior, and all of those things that we know are precursors to having a better outcome, definitely speaks to that. But at the same time, it's like the poor awareness of his deficits. We're 13 years out, man. That's nuts.
It was just the anniversary last Friday.
Yeah.
On the 12th. It was every year. And like, I have PTSD, I have anxiety, I have night traumas now. I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Body Remembers the Score, but I can't. April 1st rolls around. Like, I was talking to my mom this year. I'm like, God, what is wrong with me? I'm so anxious. Like, I just can't sit still. I can't go do anything. I just feel paralyzed. And I'm like, oh, it's almost the 12th. There it is. Yeah. And every year, as hard as I try, I acknowledge it. I know it's happening, but it still just has such an impact upon my life. I just can't escape it. I just have to acknowledge it and go, all right, well, it's time for,
because it's a grieving process, just like, if it was a full-blown death, in a way it was a death because it was a death of what was before, like you said, and now what's next. And even though it's been a number of years, your role is still pretty significant in making sure that, the things that need to get done around home. And I know that sounds ridiculous to some people, but people have to pay their bills, and people have to make sure their household is run and you have a full-time job and you've got a full-time animal volunteer thing that you participate in that sort of become, your passion. I mean, you were always the animal lover, but
Yeah.
it's become sort of an outlet, I think. And that's another interesting point is when you're a long-term caregiver, being able to give yourself permission to have that outlet, because that's
There's
really hard for a lot of people.
there's a lot of guilt. I never did anything for myself for years. Like I didn't even go shopping. Like everything had to go into getting him to work. Like I had the fantastic community of EOD guys who were so wonderful. When Pat first got out of the hospital, he went straight into chief initiation, and they would take turns and come and pick him up in the morning. So I didn't have to get up and take him to base because he wasn't allowed to drive at that point. We asked everyone in both states, because at that time he was still a Washington resident, like, well, what do we have to do to allow him to drive? They're like, oh, he's fine. We're like, we're not telling him that. And that responsibility fell on me to say when he could drive again. And it was a lot of the time, I don't have children, and I don't want to equate him to a child, but it's like a frustrated teenager coming at you, but it's not your teenager, it's your husband. And you're trying to make decisions for his best interest and his safety, but he hates you for it at the time. And the emotions that come along with brain trauma are so much more intense. It's very raw, it's very guttural, and you will get unloaded on a lot. And you will start to question whether or not you are a good person a lot. Like, am I being controlling? Am I being insane? Is this my anxiety controlling this decision? It's a very hard, very lonely place to be. And especially being in the community that we are in, nobody talks about mental health. Nobody talks about it. Was all very, oh, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. We'll take care of him, which was so lovely that they wanted to just take care of him and, enclose him within the community. But everybody, I don't like, I know Pat will listen to this, but I told him I was going to be brutally honest about this because I want other people to know that they're not alone. Like this is hard. It's hard. There so many guys in Bethesda. One of our friends, shortly after Pat was hurt, he lost his leg in Iraq, and his wife is also an operator, and she was in Bethesda with him, and she said, "You wouldn't believe how many wives just hauled butt as soon as their husbands got hurt." One guy had a note pinned to his hospital gown saying, "I can't do this, bye," because it's hard.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, the stigma that is attached, with military, and I hope that it's gotten better. I'm not 100% convinced that it has. I think the operator, challenges have changed because we're, the wartime issues that we were facing at that point, in Afghanistan and Iraq, are completely different now. It's not the high speed, environment, the constant deployment, the constant training. Because I was in the same, well, not the same boat, but a similar boat with the deployments and the training and, having to hold down the fort. And I think in some ways that preps you for certain things, but it doesn't prep you for, you look forward to the deployment being over and the person coming back and being able to take over some more of those, take back some responsibility, even though that's really also that we could do a whole podcast on that because that's really hard to relinquish that control. You've got it all together and then they come in and screw it all up. But
I can't even tell you how many times my husband, since his brain trauma, has rearranged my kitchen, and we have been on the verge of divorce because he can't remember where everything is. So he says, well, I'll just rearrange everything. But then he nor I know where everything is.
Oh, gosh.
After he's rearranged it.
Yeah.
But it's again, like he feels the need for control. I understand that, but go organize your office or something.
Yeah. Fix your closet.
Something
with the car in the garage. Yeah. Yeah. But I think it really speaks to that long-term situation. And even though there are things that have gotten better and things that are more in control, the long-term consequences, have changed things that you're able to participate in. And, you mentioned being, especially him being social, but were you were a lot more social,
I
I
was.
think, before. You had a good network of EOD wives and, girlfriends that you did things with and did social activities and girls' dinners and, all the things that 20-something military wives do.
Yeah.
And so, kind of if you're comfortable speaking to kind of what happened with that, because there was a lot that kind of went on after the accident.
Yeah, you really kind of learn who your friends are. Like there's your teammates, and then there's people who showed up for you. And there was a handful of people who showed up for us and who are my family now. My mom was one of my huge supporters. She flew in. She took leave from her job. She was a teacher, and she flew in. And she in ICU. She stayed with me the entire time, and in step down. And she would take night shift, and one of the guys would sit with her, so that if Pat started, getting randy, they could restrain him. And then I would switch out and take days.
Are you taking advantage of our new amazing feature? The Certificate Tracker. The free CE Tracker allows you to keep track of all of your CEUs, whether they are earned with us at speechtherapypd.com or through another provider. Simply upload your certificate to your registered account and you're all set. So come join the fastest growing CE provider, speechtherapypd.com.
The guys who knew us the longest, one of them made sure they were always there with us if we needed anything. And they organized meal Trains. And I don't think ICU at Norfolk General was ever fed better. It was wonderful. But when it started getting into the rehab part of it, people were kind of like, ooh, yeah, this is getting kind of ugly. And more people fell away. Yeah, it took a long time, but there was a handful that still came. Jeremy, one of our dear friends, he would come on Friday night and stay in the room with Pat so that I could go. I was fortunate enough to have one of the family suites at Riverside, which was wonderful, so that I could have a few hours of quiet and peace. And me being very introverted and my husband wanting to talk all the time and having brain trauma and asking me the same question over and over again. And I know it sounds horrible me saying this, but it made me want to scream. It was very frustrating. It was also just a blaring reminder all the time of how far we had to go. And there was a few people who stuck with us through the whole thing. Jeremy did. Our friend Paul, they'd feed him. They'd come and feed him. They'd sit with him so I could have a little break. And Johnny, our friend Johnny Cox, he would do the same. And they all still check on him all the time. And they're very helpful. They're like, hey, we noticed Pat's kind of like having a bad day. Do you guys need anything? Without that help, like they're very good sounding boards. I can't imagine being completely alone in this situation. It's very hard. A lot of the wives have come to me after what has happened to Pat because their husbands are experiencing probably not as severe, but similar things. And they just need somebody to talk to. And because you don't talk about this in the military, you don't talk about it. It's not a pleasant conversation to have. So no one wants to talk about it. And so I've kind of made it a point to discuss these issues with people. If they ask, I just lay it out on the table like, oh yeah, we're a mess. Yep, it's a disaster, 100%, but we're still going. I mean, you just can't do it by yourself. Without the people, you'd be in trouble.
Yeah. How comfortable are you talking about like the amount of therapy and the types of therapy that you sought out? And if you're not, you don't have to talk about it.
It's fine. It's fine. I'm just laughing because it's so much.
Yeah, but again, if you're comfortable sharing, because again, it's something that people don't talk about, whether it's the
Yeah.
military community, the concussion community, the TBI community. And a lot of times it's shame, embarrassment. It's also lack of access to care a lot of the time, or even knowing, like having the resources to know where to even start.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this will get me in trouble, but so when he was still in, he was very afraid that his job would be taken away. So we did counseling under marriage counseling, but we luckily finally found some therapists who were willing to go, okay, we understand. We're just going to bill this as marriage counseling. So you show up. So both of you are here, but if he needs help, then I'm going to help him privately. I can't even tell you, at least five, six, I can't even remember anymore. 5 or 6 therapists we tried. One was a complete wackadoodle, who thought she understood
Me.
No, it was not you. You are one of my favorites from the beginning because you just laid it out. You and his trauma surgeon. I'm like, you are my people. Like, I was warned. I was warned about our trauma surgeon. They're like, you're not going to like him. He's like Dr. House. I'm like, oh, we'll be fine. I got a hug. He hugged me and the nurse almost fell over. She's like, he never hugs anyone. But yeah, we had one real wackadoodle therapist that thought she understood everything Navy Special Operations, and she did not. And that took actually a while to step back because that created a lot of issues in our relationship. Also because Pat has a very hard time being honest about what his deficits are and things that have happened. And so basically I have to go and be the bad guy in therapy. I have to say, no, this is what I see is happening, which is a complete counterpoint to what he thinks is happening. Which is extremely frustrating because it's like you just want to be heard. And it's like, can you just tell the truth of what's going on in here? And why do you make me do this? And why do you make me be the bad guy in this situation? But I found that extremely frustrating as a spouse. It's like, don't you want to get better? Why aren't you just going to be honest about what's happening? And they can give you the tools and hopefully we'll move on from this. But I think that Navy training just stuck too deep.
Well, and part of the thing was that a lot of the injury to Pat's brain was in the right hemisphere. And so he does have anosognosia, which is that decreased awareness or admittance that he has any issues. And that was kind of from the get-go. He was already there when I met him. And I don't know, again, it's hard to know because we didn't have access to knowing where the brain trauma occurred prior to, but it's very common in those patients who have right hemisphere trauma because he did have right frontal, right temporal, and right parietal damage. And so he had a lot going on motor-wise, brain-wise, memory-wise, organization-wise, executive function-wise. And so a lot of that is, again, we don't want to minimize how much progress he made, but a lot of that damage is still in place and present. And while he's been able to have some pretty significant accomplishments up to this point, the anosognosia is still pretty obvious to people that are in the profession and certainly to you because, again, the long-term consequences became, I think, really exacerbated too when the pandemic happened because a lot of things that you had finally started getting, moving towards and getting into a little bit more changed and kind of got put on hold. Do you want to talk about your dogs?
My life partner.
Your joy biscuits.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because anyone who knows my husband and knows my dogs are like, you literally got the dog version of your husband. I said, yeah, but the dogs listen. So we had a Mastiff who was my husband's like heart dog when he was in the accident and everything. He passed away January in 2017, and Pat was unfortunately gone at the time. And It was so eerily quiet in our house, even though we had a couple cats. It's not the same companionship you have from dogs. And I researched the crap out of everything. Anything you told me to do as a spouse, you're like, oh, you need this game, you need Blockus, you need this and this. I'm like, I'm on it. I'll go get it. I'll go read the book, whatever. But so like I started researching dog breeds and I kept coming back to Belgian Malinois. I needed something to get me off my butt. I needed something that would keep me going every day because I was also in a very deep place of sadness. And like you said, grief. I joke and say I got 2 husbands in one because I had one husband prior and then I have another husband after. And they're 2 completely different people. And even physically, he's taken this physical stance of looking semi-homeless, which is hard because my husband is actually very handsome, but right now he looks like he should be panhandling at Target. I don't know if that's an association. One of the therapists had mentioned that's an association of self-loathing, not accepting yourself, not dealing with the past. So I'm assuming that's all of his PTSD, his brain trauma rolling in. And I dearly wish he would take the step and accept himself for handsome face and clean that up. But it's hard. And he's actually struggled a lot with self-care for a very long time, like just bathing, showering. I'd be like, you need to shower. And he's like, oh, I thought I did. I was like, I think it's been a couple days because I can smell you. I don't say that to embarrass him, but it's just, he didn't realize it'd been 3 days since he showered.
It's a good place to say that he was very meticulous about his appearance and being clean shaven and having a specific haircut. And you mentioned, now he's got this, tends to have the longer hair. He tends to have this unkempt looking beard. And it's just not, like you said, it's like 2 different people. Even appearance wise, he looks like 2 different people. And not because of the scars necessarily. It's like you said.
You really don't even see the scars. You can't see him anymore.
Exactly.
He's had everything lasered off. You don't see anything.
Yeah.
Except
But the
what he wants to
appearance,
present.
Yeah. The physical appearance, I think, is a good manifestation of maybe the things that he doesn't admit to and the things that he doesn't share. That's always been a big thing too, and part of his recovery. But again, that's impactful for you.
There's a disconnect because I tried to put it in perspective for him. I was like, I've always tried to at least look, I roll around in the dirt all day at work. And I realize I'm not always like, looking really spiffy or anything. But I do try to like dress up and I try to look nice and try to maintain my appearance. And he's not holding up his end of the bargain. We've had many therapy sessions over this. I'm like, I can still fit my wedding dress and it's been 20 years. So, you should be able to clean it up a little bit. I almost feel like some of it's out of spite. He's a very stubborn man. So I tried not saying anything for a few years, but then it was just like vomit. I was like, can you just please do something?
It did take you a long time to get back into sort of a self-care routine. And then, your involvement with getting the dogs and being involved in something bigger than, I don't know if that was your dream to do that. I mean, you were the horse person and.
Well, I couldn't afford to continue to ride. So, and that was a big outlet for me. I was a horse crazy kid, drove my parents insane, and bless my parents, like they're school teachers, it's not like they could really afford a lot, but they got me into it. I rode from the time I was 9 until I was 20 something. And then I had a break. And right before, like 6 months before his accident, I had started riding again. I did dressage and I was really getting back into it and getting good. And I felt really bad because I actually lost my friend and my trainer in this because she just couldn't understand that. She kept pushing me to come back and pushing me. I'm like, I just can't fully commit to doing this because like either I do it all or I do it nothing. I can't do this part way. I had to quit riding because number one, I couldn't afford to. It's so expensive. And number 2, it's so much time. Like I had to drive my husband to medical appointments and I had to do all these things and I just couldn't go back to that. And that's how I ended up with my Mal is I wanted something that would keep my life going. It was something outside of my husband. And at the time, my husband was so angry at the world that I couldn't even talk to him. So I really wanted a highly intelligent dog that would challenge my brain, because before the accident, Pat, we'd have very, very in-depth conversations, always in good humor. But after the accident, they would get very aggressive. And I don't even know if he realized he's being aggressive. And it's offensive the way he speaks to me a lot of the time. And he does not get that. So I sought out this dog, and he has challenged me to the nth degree, but he has shown me a path that I never would have chosen for myself. And it's a way for me to get out of the house, number one, and for me to contribute to the world. It's not the most glamorous job in the world. You're traipsing around woods or horrible places
Swamp.
looking for someone's loved one who's missing. Swamp. I'm in the swamp a lot. We have a tick competition on our team. Whoever has the most ticks has to buy the round at the end of the day. So you try to make sure that you have a good coating of off, because you don't want to have to buy all the rounds. But
Plus there's, Lyme disease. It's fine.
well, yeah, I'm already allergic to beef. So what's worse is going to happen? It's extremely challenging, but it's a way for me to operate outside my husband. But my husband also seems to want to gravitate to everything that I do. I always just call him a koala. He's like he wants to be very independent, but when it comes down to things, he wants to do whatever I'm doing. And I want him to go away a lot.
Well, I think that's fair. You need that outlet and you need that break. And I think, again, you're several years out where you're not as apologetic about it as you were at the beginning, where you had a lot more guilt and a lot more shame and worry about what would happen if you did go home to see your family, or you did when your mom came and you went down to the Outer Banks or whatever. You had a lot of anxiety and guilt and shame about that. And I think it's okay for you to be at this point where you can say, I need a break. Who doesn't, need that independence, especially when you're a long-term caregiver, because we know when you're looking at research-based stuff that the somatic symptoms that people face, whether it's from the physical standpoint, but things like you mentioned, anxiety, PTSD, headaches, fatigue, compassion fatigue, even a lot of people experience that in the pandemic, but it's certainly something that you can experience as a long-term caregiver when you, as a normal part of it, but also when you don't ever have any time for yourself. So I think that's an important thing to acknowledge and to hats off, man, because that's a big step. No, it is. It's a big step.
No, I know. As I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of entering my villain stage. I'm approaching 40. So I'm at the point, like, I see all these memes of like, don't mess with women in their 40s because they've seen it all and they're tired of everybody's crap. So I reached out a few years ago. I just haven't been very vocal about it. And then there was also the one of, I'm not nice, I'm a good person. So I don't have to be nice to be a good person, because all nice has got me is walked on, taken advantage of, everything else. And I've always been kind of beta to my husband because his job has been more important. It's always been more important. He's certainly not knocking the importance of his job. I'm in awe of the fact of what these guys go and do. I certainly could not do it, but I've always taken a back seat to my husband. As a caregiver, you are invisible. They don't want to hear from you. I was their worst nightmare. You have to be annoying. You have to advocate for your patient. I did not leave a hospital for 4.5 months. I lived at the hospital. Every morning, I got woke up by Joe Reel. Every morning. I was like, oh God, here he comes again. Or it's like the vitals in the middle of the night and everything. I lived at the hospital as long as my husband did. And I had a lot of guilt as soon as I had time away. I had so much relief. And my body just wanted to sleep. And I felt horrible about that. Anytime that he would, they'd take him for something with the VA or anything, it was such a relief just to have some downtime and to not have to care for someone else or something else. That took a long time for me to get over. And it's only been recently in the last couple of years where I've really started to put myself first, or at least close to first as much as I can, because, well, I'm not getting any younger and he's not getting any less stubborn. So seize the day.
People have a context. Joe is a fabulous OT that I worked with at,
Yes.
the Rehab Institute. And he is still now, I still talk to him. He likes to go in early. He's an early bird. He is the ADL king. He is the one who wants to get everybody ready to go for the day so that no one's waiting on him and his patients to be able to participate in speech and OT and rec and whatever else we had going on, which is cool. But he
was fantastic at his job.
He's a ray of sunshine in the morning, and I'm not a morning person. So
you and me both, woman.
Not an early morning girl at all. Talking early, like 6:30 a.m. every day, even on the weekend. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I could hear him coming down the hall every day. Every day. But no, everyone at Riverside when I was there was so wonderful. They really were. The whole staff was great. You guys were so compassionate. And I know he really wasn't the demographic that you normally worked with. So I know he was a challenge for you all, but you guys kept him busy, and his best memories from recovery is with you guys.
That's good. That's good, because I know we worked really hard as a team. And he certainly, again, we spent so much time as a team working with both of you. But, one of the things that happened too with you is that you did have so many people that sort of like immediately pieced out. And then you had people that stuck around for a short term. And I think it really, you mentioned, being an introvert just by your personality, but it really helped. Like, you really put up a lot of walls at that point. And that took a long time, I think, for you to be comfortable, because you were such a staunch advocate and I hats off, because not everybody can have the capacity to do that. And I often don't know how you did it, but you didn't give up.
I had a lot of fire in me, because when I was 16, my uncle, who was also a veteran, had a very poor doctor. And one night he collapsed, and he had headaches for as long as I remember. He'd throw up with migraines and everything. And never did he get a X-ray or CAT scan or CT or nothing. Nobody ever thought to do that, even though he'd had a tumor on his neck and he was exposed to Agent Orange. But I was like 16, and I remember he passed out, and my parents had got a call and said, you have about 3 minutes to make a decision. He has a brain tumor the size of his fist, and he was a large man. He was 6'6", pressing on his brain stem. And you have about 3 minutes to make a decision what you want to do, or he's going to die. And so they made the decision to remove the brain tumor, and he was recovering, and it was a miracle. And then someone gave him the wrong blood type, and just completely crashed his immune system. And nobody was ever held responsible for that. And he ended up dying. And it was very traumatic, because I was brought in to say goodbye to him. Mm-hmm. And that stuck with me. And then when my dad, it was someone's fault that he died. He shouldn't have died. And and then my dad was in the hospital, and I had some interesting things happen there. And there was never a question. I wasn't leaving. If something was going to go wrong, I was going to fry somebody. So
I know that feeling.
I couldn't watch it. I was starting to feel a little like a black widow. So many men in my life have been in these traumatic situations, and I just have to live through them. And I just wasn't leaving. I just couldn't. If it was going to happen, it was going to be because everything was done correctly, and I could sleep at night.
Yeah. So I think that's a good space to sort of start to wrap up and just talk about, what kind of advice would you give other caregivers? And you can keep this as short or as in depth as you want, but I think that, given everything that you've been through and, us knowing each other now for a long time and kind of seeing the journey that you both have been on and, being able to be a part of that in some way, shape, or form, just kind of checking in every now and then and seeing how things are going. I don't want to speak for you. So what kind of advice would you give other caregivers?
Don't wait to go back to your life. A lot of my regret, like I feel like I lost a decade. Like I still like mentally feel like I'm in my 20s because I don't really know what happened until the last decade. So it's kind of that's hard for me, and I've dealt with that in therapy. It's like I gave my life to him. So don't wait to go do the things you enjoy. Don't wait to go learn new things. Find a support network. And you don't have to make everybody your support network, because there are people out there who want to, like, when tragedies happen, and I've seen this, we've lost so many friends in the war. There are people who love the drama of things happening, and you have to be very careful in those situations because they will screw you over in those situations. Keep your circle tight in that situation. Don't be giving a lot of people information. Just advocate and stand up for your patients. I don't care if you think people are going to hate you. I fired a lot of nurses. One nurse was way too interested in the royal wedding, and my husband was ripping out his NG tube, and they weren't feeding him in step down. And this was about 2 a.m. I went down to the charge nurse and lit up the nurse's station because he's ripping. They wouldn't restrain him. They're like, oh, he's fine. He doesn't need to be restrained. I'm like, that's because we're sitting with him. If someone's not doing their job, go to their supervisor, because that is your loved one. And they don't, either they care or they don't care. There's really great nurses. There's really horrible nurses. And that's your one shot. You don't get to redo all this situation. Just be annoying, be a pain in the butt, and take care of the person that you love. And get therapy.
Get therapy. Yeah. And I was the same way when my dad was sick. So I was the worst, but in the best way possible.
Exactly. Like I had to fight tooth and nail for every therapy my husband got, every doctor that he saw, even with TRICARE, who paid for everything. They were still trying to short him on things that he was entitled to. And I didn't have anything else to do. I was like, I have nothing else to do. I can sit here all day. I can call you again tomorrow. I don't care. But you're going to give my husband what he needs to better himself. So you always see like on TV, like the annoying mom or the overbearing spouse or whatever. Yeah, be that person. Because
and get therapy.
Huh?
I said, and get therapy.
And get therapy. Neurofeedback therapy has been a life changer for myself and my husband. And hyperbaric treatment for him has been the two most impactful things, mainly because he doesn't have to follow through with the aftercare. He's been to lots of therapy programs, and he doesn't use the tools that he's given a lot of time, which is so frustrating. But yeah.
And I can't advocate or speak to the validity of any of the therapies based on professional recommendation. But I know that for you, I think it's important for you to know that I feel like you did a great job in seeking out the care and making the decisions you thought would be helpful. And again, really being a staunch advocate. So I really just appreciate you being willing to share your story, especially in the hopes that someone else gets something from this.
Yeah, I really don't want anyone to feel how I felt for a decade. It's very sad. It's very lonely. There's a lot of crying in the shower. And, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be frustrated with your spouse or your loved one who is being challenging, because they're going to be challenging.
Yeah.
And honestly, just reading up on the conditions helped a lot, because I like to know how things tick. And so I wanted to know why things were doing the things that they were doing, and why his brain was broken and what parts of the brain and how it affected. That was very helpful for me. I don't think shoving your head in the hole is helpful in those situations, because it's a whole, you can't navigate it if you don't know what you're fighting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great point, and a great place for us to wrap up. I just, adore you.
I love
thank you so much again for sharing your story, and, just continuing to be such an advocate, not only for Pat, but for you too. And finally finding that outlet, because it is really helpful, and it's okay. And it's really necessary for you to be able to do that, and to share that. So
mental health has stabilized dramatically by having your own place in life.
Yeah.
You can't
live
for
we laugh.
Else.
We laugh and included some sarcasm tonight. And so hopefully that wasn't, offensive to anyone. And sometimes that's just for people that have been through some of the things that we both have been through. It's helpful to have that sense of humor, and to be able to be sarcastic, and move on and move through. So
yeah, I hope I didn't offend anyone. I'm sorry. I have gallows humor. I can't really help it with what I've been exposed to in my life. So I hope I didn't offend anyone. I just try to be very honest and open about what's going on. So
I think you did a great job. I appreciate you.
And I kept my mouth in check.
Oh, thanks everyone.
If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. Each episode comes with an accompanying audio course on speechtherapypd.com, available for a 0.1 ASHA CEU. And just for our listeners, get $20 off any subscription with promo code BRAINSTORMS20. SpeechTherapyPD.com is run by SLPs for SLPs. We've got the largest library of ASHA CEU eligible courses out there, adding fresh content every week. Remember, use BRAINSTORMS20 to get $20 off access to over 1,000 courses for an entire year. Head over to SpeechTherapyPD.com for more information and start earning CEs today. Thanks for tuning in to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. And don't forget, SpeechTherapyPD.com is your go-to for all things ASHA CEUs. Your positive reviews and support mean the world to us. We'd love for you to drop us a quick review and hit that follow button.